Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited. Welcome to everybody in the audience, everybody that's dialed in online, including my daughter. I love you. I hope all of you are having an amazing first day of Dreamforce. Are you having an amazing day? Yeah, come on. We have such a treat for you today. I am honored. I get to facilitate a conversation today between two amazing women that are helping us think about how we create, use, and govern AI in a responsible manner. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Kay Firth Butterfield, Head of AI and ML at the World Economic Forum, and Vivian Ming, co-founder and executive chair of Socos Labs. All right. So I thought we could begin by talking about each of you sharing how you build AI ethics into the work that you and your organizations do.
Sure. Shall I go?
Oh, yes, please.
All
Sorry.
right. It's a funny thing. I always say this. People pull me in and ask me to give talks about AI for good, and I always find it a bit funny, like hammers for good. If you don't hit people in the head, I feel like you're doing a pretty good thing, I guess. So how do you build ethics into practice? I know we're going to go through a bunch of very concrete recommendations. I have some of my own. But I actually find that a lot of this is about practice. And I mean literal practice, like what happens when you have tough decisions about the fastest way to build an algorithm versus the way that gives you time to actually validate that it doesn't harm people. How do you make your decisions when what will make more money for you is something that's really sticky and really engaging? But you appreciate that maybe that isn't actually solving the problem that your customer really needs to solve. It's what they're asking for. I've been there with my companies where the customer is begging you for a feature. For example, in my case, one of the first systems to do AI for hiring, they're begging you for a feature to predict who will be leaving their job soon. Except our research clearly showed that that increased bias in hiring. Wow. So if we build what they ask for, then we don't build what they need, which was the whole purpose of our algorithm, was to reduce bias in hiring. And I think in that sense, you're left with the realization that ethical practice, although there are some very concrete recommendations we're going to go through, ultimately it's you. Are you asking the right questions? What truly needs to be solved? Are you sure that your CTO or your CEO have identified the true question? Are you doing something simply because you have data? Or is that an actual problem that's going to advance the space that you're in? So we can get into all sorts of concrete areas, but the one thing I really wanted to get across is that ethics isn't something that people with long white beards are going to be able to just give you a lecture about. Ethics is a lived experience. It's making hard decisions when your interest and what society really needs begin to diverge. And you need to make a choice about something that's bigger than you. And if you don't practice, when that choice finally comes to you, I virtually guarantee you'll make the wrong one.
That is awesome. Amazing. Kay.
So, sorry to be boring, but actually, of course, I agree with Vivian entirely. It sort of takes a village to ensure that ethics or trusted AI or responsible AI or whatever you call it is implemented. So, as Vivian says, that means everyone thinking about it and it becoming the core of your raison d'etre every time you go to work. Back in 2014, I founded an ethics advisory panel for an AI company, and that was the biggest hurdle that I found with my colleagues, sort of saying to them, I need to be included at every step of the way. We need to be thinking as we design the product, as we develop the product, as we use the product and sell the product, we need to be thinking about these ethical considerations and really building that trusted AI for all the reasons that I'm sure you've heard before, but mainly because we want AI to succeed. we want our businesses to succeed using AI, but we want to protect society as well.
You know, it is interesting, though. I started in this space before the turn of the century. Strange to be able to say that that's true, but you know, doing machine learning back then was just a scientific curiosity. And then come 2006, and you have deep belief networks, and then 2011, 12, it really begins to enter the business world. And the early conferences in data science would be 20 sessions on ad targeting, and then one session simply titled Not Ad Targeting. And then I think, well, that's where I'm supposed to be. And then I go to that, and it would be about using AI to game sports betting or how to cheat the markets or something. And you realize there's a pretty hacker ethos to this. A lot of us came from a background where it was, you know, let's just try something and make it happen. That is great for experimentation, it's great for prototyping, but then there's hard work to be done in actually validating the quality of your models, not as a technical engineering question, but as an impact question.
Absolutely, and I remember, I think it was 2015, where we had sort of half a day tacked onto the AAAI conference in New York, dealing with ethics, and it was almost as if we were existing in this little world over here in one room, and all the AI scientists were over here in this big room. It's really great to see that we're all now coming together and thinking about how it impacts business.
One of the things that you've talked about, Vivian, is being able to use AI for the common good. How can people use AI to understand the impact and change that it's having on their customers, on society as a whole, so that they ensure that they are using or creating AI for that common good?
So I've got a bunch of standard things I begin with, and a lot of this was just learned the hard way along the way, which is, one thing is, it's really easy to think if you're very, very smart, and you study this incredibly sophisticated, relatively new technology, that you know, you don't need to know what came before. Every project, for me, starts with several things before I ever touch data, before I ever think about algorithms. First, read the scientific literature. You're all smart people. You can read those papers. I don't care if it's not your field. Go read it. When I became the Chief Scientist Guild, the one doing hiring for with AI, I've never had to do a job interview my entire life. What the hell do I know about hiring? So I went and read literally 100 years worth of research on hiring. You're not inventing something for the very first time. How about you actually build some things on top of what science has already proven? Another is, we have a project. I'm not going to name who it is, but boy, I'd like to cross my fingers that it's going to happen. But it happens to do with very sick kids. That may be a dead giveaway. And if you really want to understand not just where you get data from in an experience, in an AI good for good case where nobody's really collecting data. There's no ImageNet here. There's no perfect data sets. You got to really think hard where you're going to pull data in to make this happen. But you have to think just as hard about where it's going to go back. Artificial intelligence in practice is an intervention. You're assuming you're going to give something back to someone that's going to change how they do what they do. In other words, it might nudge what a little kid is wishing for. And the only way for me to really understand that is to go out and watch this process happen. So I mean literally go out and see people interact with their customers, go out with a nonprofit that's engaged in this practice. Those two things, understand what people have studied before and see how your tool might actually be used. I mean literally go out in the field. I don't know how many people, engineers or AI specialists in specific, do this, but I don't know how you do your job if you don't actually understand how the tool will get used on the other end, because it's not magic. I am not Hermione Granger. This is 100% a powerful tool that is only valuable in the hands of someone that can use it.
Absolutely, and I don't know, Vivian, I often talk about Harry Potter's magic wands and how you...
Sounds like the worst porn movie of all time.
Absolutely, and if you don't use this thing correctly, but and yet, so if you don't use it correctly, you're going to have problems, as we saw, and most of us were brought up on Harry Potter. But also, you can apply it to AI. You know, we know if it's not used properly, if it's not tested properly, if we don't practice properly with it, then it's not the panacea to cure all ills. And one of the things that worries me about, you know, the AI for good movement is, as Vivian says, you have to go and find out what the impact is. There's a great op-ed in Wired today talking about how there are tools being used for good, but if you're using facial recognition, for example, how are you using those tools? How are you making sure that those tools are not affecting the liberty of people? How are you making sure that those tools are not creating false positives and things? So it's really important that we lay some firm foundations, these ethical foundations around the use of AI, before we go and think that we can wave our magic wand and make everything better.
Sorry, I'm going to giggle every time we say wand now. So I just wanted to add one last thing in defense of you all. Earlier this year, I was in DC, and I was part of a working group with David Autor, who is this labor economist at MIT, and we were supposed to produce a policy paper on how do we improve equity in jobs and work using AI. And the whole room, I was the only technical person there. There were lots of reps of big companies, but they were the government relations people. And the number one recommendation that came out of the room is we should have ethics trainings in engineering schools. So, you know, you all not having humanities degrees don't understand what ethics is. So if you got trained, just like in business schools, everything would magically get more ethical, right? So the one thing I said was, listen, some of my students have been the smartest, most thoughtful people. You know, they were talking about the trolley problem long before any of you have ever heard of it, and they moved on to bigger and better considerations. And I actually kind of, in a horrible way, wish my day had gone in reverse. Because Dulles Airport is already one of the shittiest airports in the entire world. And now it has a very special shitty place in my heart because some guy molested me there that evening. I was standing just like a kiosk, and this drunk guy comes up and gets all handy. And really, you look at the face and you think, wow, he really must have been drunk. But I later got to get his name off of the police report and do a basic little search on him. Turned out he studied religion at Princeton. So maybe ethics isn't something you learn in a class. It doesn't matter how hard you study it, it is how you practice it that really matters.
It's a mindset, not a checklist.
Yeah.
It's a way of how we think, how we solve problems, how we have discussions with each other so that we are able to understand better, not just what is the purpose of why we're creating, not just can we do this, but should we do this. I think user experience research, which hopefully many companies that are represented in this room have user experience researchers on staff. And it's so incredibly important to be able to understand who are you impacting? Who is it that is going to be touched, not just first order, but second order, by what you are creating? Kay, I know that you and the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution has been doing some amazing work this past year and long before to create different tools and frameworks to help businesses and governments procure AI and govern it and implement it. Can you tell us about some of those tools?
Sure. So what we do at the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution here in San Francisco, but also we have offices in Beijing, Japan, and Mumbai, and affiliates all over the world. So what we're actually doing is looking at governance with a small g of technologies that use artificial intelligence. So for example, Lofred Madzou, who is in the audience, leads a project with our fellow from France around helping the French government to think about facial recognition. How do they use facial recognition to keep the French population safe? But at the same time, how do they use it without taking away the civil liberties of the French population. So what we do is not work with France and consult with France, but the work with France actually informs what we then do around the world. So we'll scale it from France to Europe, to India, to Colombia, to all the other places that we work in as the forum. A lot of countries around the world. Kathy, you mentioned procurement. The team working on procurement is also here. That has been led by the UK government. And what we've done is we've created high-level principles. You can read about them on LinkedIn, actually today, for the procurement of artificial intelligence by the UK government. We've now piloted those principles with 4 ministries across the government, and so we will finalize them. We'll create a workbook so that procurement officers actually know how to apply them, and then we will conclude the project with the UK, but we're already scaling and piloting elsewhere. So we've already piloted in the UAE and Bahrain, and we'll be piloting in other places around the world and encouraging governments to use these same tools. Why are we doing it? Well, we know that there are some really important places that AI can go badly wrong. We also know that regulation is a bad idea for AI. And yet, how do we deal with that sort of soft piece of regulation in the middle? So that's the work that we're doing. And in fact, we have a project on with New Zealand at the moment, thinking about what a regulator should be doing. So innovation is impeded by regulation. Well, regulation also keeps us all safe. So what's actually that middle point that we should be thinking about? We actually have lots of projects, but I won't bore you by keep telling you about more and more and more of them.
All right, we could play a little tension here. I actually think one thing is really clear. There's a certain kind of regulation, which I think is asinine. And it happened right here in San Francisco, which is passing a law to ban the use of facial recognition within the borders of San Francisco. And the reason I think it's ridiculous is not because these technologies can't be abused. It's because we actually see this happen a lot. For example, back in the early 80s, there was a law passed that said that you couldn't use IQ tests on certain populations in the United States. And then later, it turned out that that would apply even in cases where it would be helpful. We're trying to assign people to honors classes or assess them for autism, would unfortunately had been banned by this law. And so you couldn't do assessment on a kid that had dark skin. That was crazy. Legislators should not, they are not experts, they're not you, they shouldn't be deciding with a law that something does or doesn't happen. But I do believe that there is a genuine role in some kind of regulation, whether it's on the public side or something that industry can develop itself. I'm a little skeptical sometimes in that realm, but I'm willing to hear it out, in creating frameworks that allow people to explore ideas without just having it be a free-for-all. So I've done a lot of work in face recognition. It's not ready for prime time. It is amazingly powerful. There are cool things you can do with it. But right now, if you're doing policing using face recognition algorithms, if you haven't heard of all the findings in this space, then go check it out. My favorite recently was that most of the professional athletes in Boston probably should have a warrant out for their arrest because apparently you can't distinguish them from people that do have warrants out for arrest for them. So these systems are really not necessarily ready for prime time. Using them to decide who gets jobs, using them to decide who goes to border security is something that, boy, we really need to take seriously. At the same time, passing a law that says no face recognition, then if someone comes up with the technology that can help diagnose genetic disorders in kids, is that against the law? Would a doctor be breaking the law if they used face recognition? So again, I don't think legislators themselves should be saying no to this technology and yes to that. But we can, as a society, come up with frameworks that can create something. And I have some recommendations here, but if nothing else, almost like but CDC or WHO. Like, if you had an organization that loved AI but cared that it was being used right, yours is involved as well, that could come in and say, listen, this is a really cool technology, but the way you're using it, there's a better way forward. I think we can make more mature decisions about this, because one thing's clear, the answer should never be yes or no, and people that aren't experts on this sure as hell shouldn't be the one making the decision.
So how do we know when technology is safe to be unleashed on the world? Because you gave some, fantastic examples that this is not ready for prime time. And so if we don't have that rule in place and it's just a free-for-all, and we know that there's a segment of the population that's going to be harmed, again, taking it back to the business context, how do businesses know when technology is ready to leave the lab and actually go out into society?
I think that goes to the procurement project that I was talking about earlier. The reason that the UK wanted to work on this is actually because a lot of businesses are worried about what the regulation will look like. They're not prepared to go on with R&D and seeing what they can do with AI, because they are worried that that will be wasted dollars. And so what the UK wanted to do, very much as Vivian was saying, is, well, not regulate, but let's make a framework so that people know what they can do and where our tolerance level is, but we can allow them to experiment within that framework.
Yeah, that's. So there's the starting point here of actually what are your practices. So again, for us, it comes really fundamental. The starting point is this the right question? I'm not going to name names, but it's easy to figure out. A big company got dinged a couple years ago because they built a hiring algorithm that didn't want to hire women. And I think the fundamental problem with them wasn't that they were bad people. It was that they built an algorithm that effectively worked like this. Let's take all of our hiring history and, in essence, predict who will get a promotion in their first year. So they got this amazing, perfect data set, just like you all had when you were PhD students, if that's what you happen to have done. And they had this explicit question, who gets a promotion in their first year? And they had all the right answers. That's just like a classic PhD project that you go show your work at ICLM or NIPS or something, NeurIPS nowadays. Except it isn't that. The question was wrong, the data set was wrong, everything about it was wrong, and someone should have said something. But I'm going to push it even a little further, because then it didn't work. And by the way, they knew it wasn't going to work because they tried to hire me to do it, and I told them it wouldn't work. But then the follow-up, they spent about a year massaging their data. What if we took out all the gender markers and all the women's colleges and all the words that said women? Well, what's the overwhelming correlation that's still in the data? That men were vastly more likely to get a promotion in their first year than women. It's still there. You can do all the data manipulation you want. These deep neural networks are purely correlational. They can't figure out causation on their own. And if you don't know anything about causation, then again, take a pause on the whole thing, go read some research. See what's actually related to what makes a great employee. Turns out, again, there's a huge amount of research on causal factors in what makes a great employee. If your findings look different than every research paper, then maybe you aren't finding what you thought you were looking for. So again, I think we need to flatten a lot of hierarchies here, allow people working on the front lines of these problems to talk back to their elders, but also bring in domain experts. It's not enough to hire the smartest guys out of MIT and Stanford and think they're going to magically solve your problems for you. Because let me tell you something, and you may disagree, but it turns out I'm always right about everything. AI cannot solve a problem that in some sense you don't know or already have a solution to. It can completely change the economics of those solutions. And at advanced level, yeah, it can be used to explore problems in really novel ways. But if you're out there building product and you think, I don't know how to solve this, but my deep neural network will figure it out, you are on your road to misery. So just don't get started on that in the first place.
So automation is coming into the workforce. It's here. It's going to increase. But one of the things that we need to think about is how do we keep the creativity and the humanity in the decisions that we are making. AI plus human is far better than human alone or AI alone. How do we take the best of what AI can offer and the best of what human creativity and humanity can really offer?
You want to keep tag teaming these?
Yeah, sure, go.
Okay, so I mean, this is a big one for me. When I went and studied for my PhD, I didn't study machine learning. I studied brains. It just happened that I discovered this field called theoretical neuroscience where people used machine learning to study brains. So for me, it was always applied right from the beginning. And when I went around and interviewed for PhDs, I told people I wanted to build cyborgs. And they thought I was, complete weirdo. So nonetheless, I got to do that work, and now it's a thing. But for me, it's always fundamentally been AI has always stood for augmented intelligence. I can geek out about self-driving cars. I think there's amazing work to be done in optimizing industrial IoT, but I want to make better people. So then I end up with a simple question, which is twofold, and I apply this to all of it, AI or not, any technology I build. One is, am I better when I'm using it? Unfortunately, I think a lot of technology fails that right off the bat. I don't need to name names. You can decide for yourself. But I hate social media with a passion that dims the sun. But the second is, am I better than when I started when I turn it off again? And a lot of technology fails that second one. When we're thinking about AI and thinking about how do we make people better, I realize that's just like a shorthand, right? This is a deeper question. But genuinely, does it make me a better person, even when I'm not using it? That is my love. That's the level I'm aiming for. That's my threshold. If I'm not achieving that, if I'm substituting for what someone should be doing instead of augmenting them, then it does not leave our lab. There are maybe genuinely some things that humans shouldn't be bent over in fields picking strawberries, but nonetheless, that's a different field than what I work in. Most of the spaces we're talking about, building stuff for professionals to do their jobs even better, building things to engage people in their lives, not just to turn their brains off, but to try and make them a better person, even if you're building entertainment systems based on AI. Whoever here might be involved in TikTok's algorithm, aspire to do more than just shut people's brains down. Make them better. Show them a short little video that will actually drive their brain and cause them to deeply engage with the material. Same thing if you're from Instagram. Same thing for every social network. You can change someone, and you should. And it should be for the better.
I love it.
Yes, certainly, and I echo some of the things that you've said. It reminds me a little bit about what Asa Raskin of the Center for Humane Technology says, which is that we shouldn't be thinking about when AI surpasses our abilities and is better than us all. We should be thinking about when AI starts to overcome the things that we're actually not so good at. So really, making sure that we work and AI works for us at all levels, and worrying about the fact that now there are lots of things that AI can do better than we can. Mm-hmm. And is that necessarily good for society as a whole? I think that the other piece that I would like to add is just as you were saying, that we really need to be thinking about whether we need AI everywhere and making sure that AI is actually helping to lift us as human beings rather than oppress us with, for example, social media, as you mentioned.
So I got to say, one of the funnest times I ever had on stage was debating Ray Kurzweil. Who, if you've never heard of him, came up with the idea of this singularity is going to, or popularize the idea that an AI singularity will come. And his feeling is, if you sprinkle AI in everything, the world gets better. So welcome our AI overlords, it will make everything wonderful. My question was, of course, will we ever have AI overlords, and aren't we getting way ahead of ourselves because no one's ever invented anything remotely like this, and your toaster isn't going to wake up tomorrow. He's a little bit of a nut job, but it was still fun. But I think one of the fundamentals, though, when we talk about should things get built, and does it even need AI to make us better, is genuinely, I say this as someone that it's wildly, aspirational about what humans can achieve. I mean, I think everybody, and my fundamental rule is everyone is amazing. It's just, admittedly, many of us don't get the chance to live that life, but boy, we could. Having said that, I'm also a realist. Most of us are amazing, and yet we don't live that life. And we want to sit down and watch a crappy show later, and it's really easy to make us scared when we vote. And, fighting against that is hard. Rolling with it is easy. So the same way I'm challenging people to dig deep and do deep processing when they're engaged with the world rather than shallow, I'm challenging all of you to build deep. Build things that challenge people. I'm telling you, because I recognize it, it's not going to be as sticky. So you have to work, it's got to be twice as good a product as your competitors, because people won't want to use it as much if it really is challenging them. But what's the point if it's not? And I have a fairly go-to example here, which really, again, you'll get the feeling, I'm not talking about bad people. So again, I'm a neuroscientist. Here's a pretty easy prediction for the future as I see it. In 20 or 30 years, we're going to see a significant increase in early onset dementia. And it will be causally related to automated navigation systems. Now, this isn't because the people who built Google Maps are bad or Waze or any of it. It is simply because we know with excruciating scientific detail that navigating through space is prophylactic against cognitive decline, and I don't have to do it anymore. I use Google Maps everywhere I go. It makes me a native or close to it everywhere around the world, at least for the purpose of getting to my hotel. And yet, it's a classic example. I am better when I'm using it, but I am worse than where I started when I turned it off again, at least a tiny bit worse. So here's what I throw out to my students' office when I give lectures. This engineering entrepreneurship class at UC Berkeley is, imagine you were redesigning a navigation system, an AI-driven navigation system, and your user had to be better when they arrived. You couldn't just tell them how to get there. And yet, it's still got to be sticky enough to be competitive. Yeah. Now that's your challenge. Take any product, your own internal one or one you use every day, and rethink, how can I make this so that after someone uses it, and they're done and they turn it off, they're better than when they started? I think fundamentally, ethical AI begins with a genuinely, brutally honest question for yourself like that. It continues with, am I really making decisions in my own self-interest or someone else's? Many of the other it's not really a checklist, again, but many of the other items we're talking about, really review yourself hard as you're engaging in these things.
And just if you want to look at that study, it was a study done on London cab drivers where they were tested for their likelihood to get dementia, and obviously they could do a longitudinal study on that. And the London cab drivers, who have to learn so much, they all tested so much better than those of us who are following our Google Maps, which then shows something else in this interconnected world. We are all using Uber. Uber relies upon Google Maps. And so, but we would all say, or some of us would say, it's great to be able to get an Uber. So when you're thinking about ethical AI, it just sort of goes round, and you have to think about it in from every perspective.
So my advanced apologies to my husband and daughter, because I am so screwed. I am clearly going to be developing dementia based on my excessive reliance on navigation. I cannot find my way anywhere.
I've got some fun and deeply irresponsible experiments you can participate in. And help with that.
That sounds amazing. Let's talk about kids for a minute. I know that both of you have done a lot of work and a lot of thinking about AI and kids. And and its impact for better and for worse. So Sokos Labs has done some amazing work to help kids. And then WEF, one of the projects in the portfolio is Generation AI. Mm-hmm. So maybe we can start off with Generation AI, Kay, and you can tell us about that.
So my background is that I'm actually a barrister. That's the wig and gown type of lawyer in England. And when I was working in law, I used to do human rights law, and particularly children. And so when I came into thinking about ethical AI, obviously children and the fact that their brains can be manipulated or nudged so much more easily was one of the things that I was particularly deeply interested in. And so we started a project with UNICEF to really think about, initially, toys, AI-enabled toys, and to think about the privacy issues that are involved in the AI-enabled toys, to think about something like advertising. You're not allowed to advertise to kids, but if the doll, for example, says to the child, "I'm cold," and the child says to its parent, "We need to buy the doll a coat," is that advertising, or is that just part of the general conversation? Thinking also about the ability to manipulate, the fact that we're buying educational toys at the moment for our kids, but we have no idea what the curriculum looks like or who wrote it. All those issues come together in my mind as a human rights issue for kids. We need to use AI because in some ways it's very good to help to diagnose kids with autism, for example. But we have to be really careful and to build a safe space here. If your AI toys come with a backstory, how do you learn creative play? Because I'm betting that most of you created backstories for your toys. That's not necessarily going to happen if you've got AI-enabled toys. So the work that we're doing with UNICEF and LEGO is actually to think about what a new convention on the rights of the child for the digital age should look like. Thinking about how we encourage governments to look at the use of AI with children, and also what are the right guidelines or frameworks for companies developing these products to use to self-police.
Yeah, Vivian.
So one of the hard things I learned, so my first ed tech company was 10 years ago. And I've done a lot of work in the space before then, since then. And one of the things that was hardest to learn initially is, here's a generalization. AI, as we really mean it today, things like deep neural networks, it turns numbers into numbers. AlphaGo doesn't know a damn thing about Go. Mm-hmm. And yet, it can beat the world's best Go players trivially easily. So a lot of people build these things. Even if we get outside of AI and we just think about analytics, you build these things, you turn numbers into more numbers, and then you throw up a dashboard in front of people. And you expect them to do something useful with that. Now, if you're talking about a fairly sophisticated user base, that might really happen. Although I have to say, having had a lot of companies and seen a lot of supposedly sophisticated users have no idea what they're doing or how they use this stuff. Again, at Guild, our whole point was we take bias out of the hiring process. Then we did, like you were saying, our user testing on the recruiters using our tool. And what did they do? They opened up a profile that they paid a lot of money for, their C-suite did, and then they looked at your name, your school, and your last job. Exactly the same thing a recruiter would have done 50 years ago with a paper resume. And we're like, why did you buy this if you're just going to use it in the exact same way with the same bias you'd treat a traditional resume? So again, what I'm getting at is you need to solve a problem. It is not enough to turn numbers into numbers. One thing we learned in the education space is if I effectively said the following, doesn't matter whether it's numbers or bar charts or just a statement, your child is going to drop out in 5th grade. But if we do the following, It doesn't matter what you say after but, you're just a peanuts parent. Want, 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 want. Like, all they hear is your child's going to drop out in 5th grade. And it turns out, again, this has been really well studied for a long time. Teachers, the parents themselves, the kids themselves, as soon as they hear that prediction, which you intend to not come true, all they hear is their future. And teachers will give up. Parents will give up, you induce fixed mindsets in these kids, and it turns out it's a cursed crystal ball. So how do you move forward? How do you do good with a system that is cursed? Well, what I come back to, what we learned the hard way, is people don't need numbers, they need answers. And if I believe that my system is doing something well, and we've followed all these best practices and really validated everything, I should be able to give them an answer. Do you have 20 minutes to spend with your kids tonight? Well, here's the best way to spend those 20 minutes. Not because your kid's dumb, not because your kid's a genius, but just give them something. We're going to work on growth mindset tonight. And here's a task that's going to help with that. You don't have to do more than that, a little parental attention and some engagement. There's an enormous amount of sophisticated machine learning behind making that recommendation. So many different types. But it distills down to something we could send in a text message. And it engages the parent at the level they're thinking about the problem. I care about my child, or godparent, foster parent, grandparent, doesn't matter. I care about my child. I just want a little help. And so you give them a little help that's been validated, it's been proven. I found one thing is being a chief scientist, it isn't about explaining how it works. I'm all for explainable AI, but it's about building trust with people. And even your C-suite executive fellows, they're not going to get it. However smart they think they are, they're not smart enough. They want to believe that you can actually help. And so do your customers. Don't violate that trust. Really live up to it. And it's not easy because, boy, it is so much easier just selling them trash.
Yep. All right. So last question for both of you. What words of advice, what recommendations do you have for the people in this room and those online for how they can build ethics into their companies in a way that scales?
Okay, so I have 2 very practical suggestions. One is a project that we did with Singapore and are now scaling globally, and that's a framework for embedding ethical processes in your AI tools and in your businesses. So that's published, and anybody who wants a copy of it can be in touch with us at ai@weforum.org, so easy. The other thing that we have been building, and I think it's really worth a look, is a toolkit for boards of directors. When we looked at boards of directors, we found that a lot of them were not technically literate. Yeah. And so the toolkit explains something of AI, not in the detail we'd like, but explains, gives them some underpinning, and then looks at different aspects of their work as boards of directors and how AI would affect that. And right in the center of that piece of work, the 12 modules, is the ethics piece, how to build an ethical AI panel, how to build an ethical company, what you should be asking of your C-suite around ethics, how you should embed it across everybody who's doing work in this area. So again, 2 very concrete recommendations there.
So I'm going to go a little farther out there. And call for some big changes. Just finished writing up a piece called One GPU, One Vote, where we're really questioning not AI as a technology, but AI as a current practice, whether it's even compatible with civil rights. A tiny number of companies I respect, control virtually all of the infrastructure behind artificial intelligence today. Maybe even if we solve all the bias problems, there's still something fundamentally challenging about it only acting in the interests of a very small number of players from a very small number of countries. So one is, let's diversify the field. I don't just mean get more women into your groups, get more people of color into your groups, but I do. Having worked in face recognition for 20 years, we wouldn't still be unable to see black people if some black people have been involved in building this stuff. But I'm going further. Every bank in the world has accepted the fact, every public company accepts the fact that their financials will be audited. I know I'm talking about something that the tech industry will go into kicking and screaming only. But maybe we should start talking about having audits be a standard part of data practice. Another is finding that middle ground. How do we find policy not about legislators passing laws, but institutions that can go out there and establish best practices and give institutional support? And the last thing, and this is really out there, but I'm finally hearing other people talking about this. A lot of economists are talking about a public option for AI. So not all the infrastructure is owned by a tiny number of people. I'm not so certain I'm behind the public infrastructure side, but something bigger than it currently is today. And the other side is really figuring out how data trusts. I love this. One of the chief scientists at Amazon proposed this, and I've been addicted to it ever since. Allow people to collectivize their data together with other people that have a similar feeling about how it can get used, and use that, because I think as long as we've got 9 companies and then all the rest of us, that is an imbalanced relationship, and we need to break that. It's the American in me. We need a balance of power.
Thank you both so very much.
Thank you.
Please join me in giving them a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.